Hello, hello, testing, testing. Good morning, everyone. We are about to start. Hey, Valek, Troskar, out there, Haram. Sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name. Welcome to the stream. I have my chat next to me, so I should be able to, have a look at the chat, and if you have any questions, try to answer them on the spot, which is the idea with these live sessions. Hey, Derek. Awesome. All right, so it looks like everything is working just fine in terms of the tech. Hopefully I don't jinx it by saying that. Let me just check my Wacom. All good. Alrighty. So once again, welcome everyone. This is gonna be slightly different from what I usually do, just because what you can see right now is something that I did when I was testing the new features of ZBrush 2021.7, but also the interface is quite different. The reason is because this is meant to be, or this is a live stream or a live session that I'm doing as a bonus for my UCG students. So in case you don't know what that is, I'm going to walk you through it very briefly, but just so that just to have a little bit of context of why things are a little bit different from what I usually do on my live streams or my custom UI, that sort of thing. And the reason I wanted to make it kind of like an open type of session, not just for the students, is because I think the methodology that I'm going to use to showcase the new features is something that anyone can benefit from it. And it's essentially what one of the core elements that we use in the learning approach and the methodology in the course as well. So if you're interested in the course as well, you can have a little sneak peek of how we deal with new features or how we basically learn ZBrush. Awesome. Clear. Alrighty, so this thing that I have right here, this is the final render, the final image that I did in Marmoset Toolbag 4, but it is all done in ZBrush, and in fact the UI, the UVs and everything like that is pretty simple, pretty straightforward. There's nothing too techy about it. In fact, this is just a decimated mesh from a high-res mesh that I'm going to show you in a second. But a lot of these things were done with the new features. Not everything. In fact, that's one of the first things that I want to mention. When a new version of ZBrush comes up or there is a new set of features, it's kind of like a building up on existing things and existing workflows that you already have. So it doesn't mean that new features, that's all you have to do to create like these awesome things. It's just you can improve your existing workflows, and you already have the core ideas of how ZBrush work and the brush system, the features that have been already in ZBrush and that you're familiar with. New features you can just incorporate into the workflow. So the idea here is that everything that I've done with this, let's say this helmet skull techie head, is using a lot of the new features, but it's also having that strong foundation of going through the pre-existing features that you probably already know. So I'm going to go ahead and move that out of the way now. I'm going to resize it. So I have a different screen here next to me, so that I can see what I'm doing. All right. So here we go. This is the head that I use. That's exactly the same mesh that I use as high res, and I moved it into the low res with a quick decimation. I'll show you that as well, just so that you have an idea of the kind of like the final result of what I did to go to Marmoset. So this is a pretty high res mesh. It is a 5 million, almost 6 million polygons in here, but it's just a Dynamesh object. So if I turn off polypaint and enable polyframe, you'll see it's pretty dense. It's actually hard to see the topology because it's pretty dense. So it's just a Dynamesh object. So what I did after was to duplicate that mesh, and this one right here is a little bit easier. Duplicated that mesh, I decimated using the decimation master, and I just literally slice it down in the middle to create two different polygroups so that it's easy to unwrap. And I just literally unwrapped two pieces, like cut in half. And now with this one, it's just already a much, a much more manageable geometry thanks to the decimation master. And then I projected the high-res mesh into, or the details of the high-res mesh into that low-res mesh. All of that in Marmoset, but you can use, XNormal or Substance, anything that you want, really. And that's how I got to that, image that I just showed you before. All right, so going back to what I was mentioning about the UCG students. So the UCG stands for Ultimate ZBrush Guide, or Ultimate ZBrush Guide course, right? And the reason I'm mentioning this is because that's essentially the user interface that you can see right now. This is the user interface that we ended up with at the end of that course. So if you're a new student, or if you just joined the UCG course, by the way, let me just show you what that is before we move on. So this guy that you can see here on the right hand side at the bottom corner of the screen, that's the character that we use in the Ultimate ZBrush Guide course. And I walk you through everything from the very, very beginning. So like starting from nothing, from scratch. So if you're an absolute beginner, or if you just want to get into ZBrush, this is a program that is designed to take you from like nothing, that not knowing anything about ZBrush, to fully render a full-on character. And the result that the students have had so far is fantastic. So this is the reason I'm showing you this, and you can find out more in the 3D Concept, or if you go to the 3dconceptartist.com. This is the full program. I'm gonna hide that one. This is the full program. So you can see all of the modules, everything that is covered. But it's for absolute beginners. So if you don't feel that you are quite there just yet with your creations in ZBrush, this is something that could definitely help you with that. Okay. So let me just see the chat. Derek, the rendering process, no, this is focusing on just the ZBrush updates. The little kind of like brief context that I gave you is just so that you know how I approached it. It's nothing too complicated, in fact. And the materials are from, I can't remember now. I think it's from, I did some in Substance, and the other ones are from Marmoset. Honestly, I cannot remember. I usually jump between like too many software and too many tools when I'm like testing things, but it's either or. Anyway, I can have a look and let you know. All right, so the other reason I'm showing you this this UI is because this is exactly the way that we approach the learning of a new tool in the course, in the Ultimate ZBrush Guide course. So that's one of the methodologies that we use that is been proven to be quite good, which is customizing your UI from the very beginning. So this is the UI that we use, and I have this custom palette. So that's the first thing that I want to show you, that you can do the same thing as well. So you can kind of like work alongside me in this brief session if you do something like that. So I set up this custom palette that if I can bring up with a custom shortcut, because this custom palette has the main features of ZBrush 2022, ZBrush 2021.7, right? So I have different sub palettes in here, and I'm gonna go through them hopefully in the first section of this session, and then I'm gonna show you a practical example of that. But essentially, yeah, if I open up the knife brushes, so these are two of the new brushes that come with ZBrush 2021.7. The bevel brushes, a couple of extra things that have already been there in ZBrush, but they're quite important or quite useful for these brushes. In fact, this bit radius should be in here in the knife brushes. So I'm going to show you how to edit this very quickly. So I have a custom menu right here, and I'm going to open up the brush palette. So this is what you can do if you want to build your own custom UI so that you can keep track of the new features, right? So I'm going to go ahead and go to Preferences, Config, Enable Customize, and you'll see the UI shifts a little bit. you can go to preference as well. And if you click on custom UI here, you can click on create new menu. Make sure that before you do that, you save the current UI or your current setup if you want to keep it. Because as soon as you create a new menu, there's no real way to remove that menu once you create it. So you have to go back to a previous UI that you have saved. So just make sure that you do that. But once you do this, you can just name it whatever you want. And in my case, I named it 2021.7 features, and I organize the set of features of the new version in there so that I know. First, I can keep track of those when I'm testing. Second of all, I can show you exactly which are the new features and how we can interact with them in a little bit more of an organized manner, so that you can remember, instead of trying to think, oh, is this like a new feature? Is this something that I can, it's been there for a while, and that sort of thing. So again, preferences, create a new menu if you want a custom palette. And in the custom palette, I just click on this custom sub palette and dropped it in that main palette so that I can divide it into multiple ones, right? So this B radius is something that it's in the clipping brushes right here, right? And I'm going to get to it. So if you want to move these to a different palette, you can hold Control, Alt, click and drag, and put it, let's say, in here, right? And that's just adding it to that section, to that sub palette. Obviously, I'm just duplicating things here, so I'm going to hold Control, Alt, click and drag this one, and drop it into the canvas to remove it. And that's pretty much it, right? You can follow exactly the same process that I just did to customize it. Again, if you're already part of the UCG course, you're pretty familiar with this process, and it's one of the main things that we do anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and click on config, enable customize, and I'm going to close this one up. I also assign a shortcut. So once you finish customizing this, so enable customize, you can hold Control and Alt, click on the menu, and as soon as you hold Control, Alt, and click on that menu, after that you can assign any shortcut. So I just assigned something to my EK remote in the Wacom, so I can bring that from any point in the UI, just to make it easier, so I don't have to jump between different palettes, right? So let's go ahead and start. Let me just show you all of them. So we have the knife brushes, bevel brushes, Interpolate, and Adjust Last. This one's fantastic. Stager probably doesn't sound like much, but probably this is my favorite feature. Masking stuff, polygroup and polypaint, and some cool extras that I'm gonna get to it. This one is not something that I don't think it has been covered that much in some of the videos that you find online as well, but it's a pretty cool thing, so I'll just show you that as well. All right, but let's go ahead and start with the first one. So the knife brushes are kind of like the new version, or the new improved version of the clipping and the slice curves, right? And it is just absolutely fantastic. Let me actually turn this one off and turn on a smaller one, or a smaller one, a less piece with less geometry, right? So the knife brushes allow you to basically cut through the model and chip things away. So that's how I generated some of the paneling on this creature, or this helmet, because it's kind of like an organic hard surface. I would describe it as organic hard surface, or a more more organic hard surface stuff. So if I hold Control and Shift, right, you can click on the thumbnail here, and you see these two brushes, right? Because I already have them in my interface. All I have to do is just click on the knife, and I'm going to click OK. And I'm going to hold Control and Shift, and it creates a curve like a line like you would have with any of the clipping brushes or the slice brushes. But one of the main differences, or two of the main differences, is that first, and I think I have, I forgot. So this is a hollow piece, because it was meant to be like a helmet, and I haven't closed it yet. So that's why you see this hole in there. But it essentially cuts through the model, and if I turn on polyframe, it creates a nice set of topology. The edges are triangulated like a Boolean topology, but for the most part, it's a pretty clean topology, and it gives you a polygroup, right? So that's the main thing. Now, this is something that you can do with the trim curves, for example. So there's nothing crazy new and interesting in here. The crazy new stuff is that you can actually go in like so, hold the Alt key, tapping on the Alt key a couple of times. do that, and you see that not only you clip and remove that area, but it's actually going inside the model. So that before this new brush was introduced, using the clip brushes or the trim brushes, it was really hard to get something as clean as this. And again, it has polygroups and everything, right? So you can run a zero measure and something like that, and it just works. So this one is fantastic. The other one is pretty much the same. The difference is the stroke. So one is just kind of like a curve that you have a bit more control for, like clean cuts. But with this lasso, you can just do these type of things. Right? One cool tip that I can give you is that depending on, and I don't know if this is true for all the brushes that are like this, but for this one right here, if you start from, let's say, left to right, it's gonna clip things away. The section that let me just show you, because this is actually hard to explain. So hold Control and Shift, and I'm gonna start from the left and then go to the right. Right? So if I do that, I sort of like chip this thing away. If I start the other way around, it just inverts it. So it just cuts the resting out, right? So you can just think about the direction. It doesn't have to be left or right. It can also be like this, like up and down, right? So depending on the direction that you use, so sometimes you might be doing this and you think, oh, I actually want to have this piece. I want to remove the rest. So just make sure that you undo that and then you do it the other way around. So that's an interesting, cool thing that you can keep in mind, and it's not necessarily implicit when you bring in those brushes. It is kind of like the same thing if you bring in the knife lasso. If you do this, you see there is like a shaded line. So wherever that shadow, that shaded version or part of the line is, that's what's going to be cut, right? So it's the same thing. So if I want to do the opposite, I just need to draw that line from the other side, just to clip that top. So that's an important but simple concept to keep in mind when using those brushes. Now the B radius is something that I found like to be the most useful for these brushes, right? And the B radius is something that you can bring in with most of the, let's say, like the clipping brushes, or the clipping brush, and I think the slice as well, and the trim. And what it does is just based on the brush radius, it's just gonna cut that piece off. So if you have that selected in your, if you hold Control and Shift, basically, and you have any of those brushes selected, what you can do is hold Control and Spacebar, and that would bring that pop-up, and you can click OK, B radius, and enable it. Again, that's the reason you can do it with Control Space to bring that up, but that's the reason I put it in here. So I'm gonna enable that, and I'm gonna click on Knife Lasso. And now, because I have that B radius enabled, the effect of what I'm gonna cut and what I'm gonna do is based on the brush radius. So let me bring in my Epic pen. Right. So yeah. So now my brush radius is, well, it's more like the diameter really of the brush. But the radius of the brush, what it's going to do is determine the thickness of whatever I cut off. So this brush, if I go ahead and do something like this with the mask lasso and the B radius enable, it's going to cut this part off, right? Or if I hold the Alt key to invert that effect, is going to cut the rest of the stuff and just give me that line. So let's do that. Try to hold Control and Shift, try to do the same thing. There we go. It took a little while, but it did it, right? So and it's actually quite close to the radius anyway, not to the diameter, like I said. So that's pretty much what it did. And if you check the geometry, you have nice polygrouping. Again, you can ignore the inside of this mesh is not very clean at the bottom and at the back, right? So super handy stuff. Let's undo that. And if I want to do the opposite, so if instead of generating kind of like that ring or that loop, what I want to do is create a gap between these pieces, and that's essentially what I did with these most of these pieces, that the larger areas of this mesh that you can see here, and I'm going to definitely show you how that works. So if I hold Control and Shift and do this, but then hold the Alt key, and hold the Alt key, there we go. It just inverts the effect of the brush, like with many brushes in ZBrush, it just inverts the effect. So instead of keeping that piece, it just clips it, or not clips it, literally knives through it and remove that piece altogether. So that's I'm going to show you a practical example again in the next section of the live stream of how I use these to we can maybe get into, I have a Nixocrellos base mesh in here, which is, it should fit. This is the head or the reference that I used to put this together, right? So it's this helmet fits within that humanoid face or human face. So maybe we can do something very quickly for maybe like a suit or an armor for the rest. That's the idea. Hopefully we have time. All right. Cool. I just got a message saying that YouTube is not receiving enough video to maintain a smooth streaming. So anyone in the chat that just confirms that you're still seeing everything all right, please. Hey, Berkay, how you doing? Good to see you here. All right, just double check the quality of the stream. Cool. All right, thanks, Justin. Awesome. So let's go ahead and move on. Sorry about that that silent spot there in the stream. So the next brushes that also were introduced in ZBrush 2021.7 are these bevel brushes. And these bevel brushes and the modifier that I have here, this hasn't been introduced. This is the simple modifier, or the modifier slider that has been in ZBrush since, probably the beginning with the brushes, but it is relevant to these brushes because they control the profile of the curve, right? So these brushes are quite useful, and you can use them in a bunch of different ways. Again, hopefully I can show you that in real time. But these are the type of brushes that I use to generate like little details. Like I remember doing like a full-on flattening of this in here. I also use these brushes to sort of clip these areas right here. Flattening certain bits and pieces, and I'm going to show you how I use that in a very specific way. But they're like super useful, like super easy to use. There's not really like a trick or anything. They just work nicely. But there are a few things in terms of the workflow and how to use them that I can show you that hopefully would help. So let me just bring in a cube, make it a polymesh 3D, and make it just make it a dynamesh cube, right? That's plenty of resolution. Just to show you what the brushes do, and then again, I can show you in like a practical example of them. So these brushes, if I go ahead and select the bevel brush, this is now my selected brush, and you see as soon as I selected that one, the modifier changed to this 50, a value of 50 in the brush modifier. So if I let's do it with a small brush size, right? If I hold, I don't have to hold control or anything. I just click and drag, and the distance between these 2 points, these yellow circles with a green indicator that tell me, hang on, let's do it again. It tells me the distance of that new bevel. So I drag in, and then if I go back, that's when the effect of the brush comes into play. But you see, this is nothing this is nothing very interesting. The reason that this is happening is because ultimately what this brush is going to do is, based on the brush size, is going to push that geometry towards that bevel brush, okay, or that bevel effect. So this is actually trying to do a nice bevel in this corner, but because of the size of my brush, is not doing a good job. So that's the first thing that you have to keep in mind. So let's undo that. I'm going to right click and increase my brush size quite a bit. It doesn't matter. Don't worry too much about the size of the brush, because the profile of that bevel that you're going to create with this brush is not given by the brush, but is given by this modifier. So again, I'm going to click and drag. And now that I have a larger brush, if I go back, now we have a nice bevel that we can get with just doing this. So this is a super nice and clean way to generate these surfaces. Now, a couple things. Again, this is super easy. If I reduce my brush size, right, and try to do the same thing in another area, let's do it in here. Click and drag, try to do the same thing. Again, it's gonna have the same problem. But if I still have my brush size, like a small brush size, and I just do a tiny little bit of a bevel, it's gonna work just fine, right? So this is a tiny bevel right here. So essentially the beveling, let's go ahead and get a bit closer here. So this bevel, right, the distance is given by those modifiers, not modifiers, those those things that ZBrush, I don't know, those indicators, right? So between this point that I clicked, that originally clicked, and then I dragged, that's literally the size of the bevel, right? So you can determine the size of the bevel just by doing that. The size of the brush doesn't really matter in this case. It's just so that as long as the brush is larger than this, so again, if you imagine, so this is my bevel starting from this point and this point. If my brush is big enough to cover that size, right, that's all good. If my brush is smaller than that, that's when you might run into issues or into problems that, but you know, it's not a big deal. You can fix them, right? Now, if you want to change the profile of that curve or of the bevel, that's when this modifier comes into place. And if you want to figure out what this is or find out what that is, you can go to Brush Palette, Modifiers, and it's this one right here. So this is the slider that I brought into my palette. So let's go ahead and go to this area right here. Let's increase the brush size. And I'm going to go ahead and change this profile, maybe push it to 100. Do the same thing, go back. Now, again, larger brush size. Okay, this is going to be not, it's a little bit hard to see, but the profile of that curve is slightly different. It's not easy to see, but I'm going to show you the easiest way to see that. So if I take this, the modifier, which is by default here to 50, right, and I set it to minus 50, right, so the negative value, instead of giving me that rounded shape, is gonna flatten that area. So I can do the same thing. Let's do this again. There we go. So now that profile is not a curved profile, is more of a flat surface. So the difference is, or like not the difference, but the effect of that modifier is essentially changing between the bevel brush and the bevel flat. So let's set this one back to 50, which is the default. So if I click on bevel flat, you see that modifier now goes to minus 100. So the bevel flat and the bevel arc, these two, are essentially the same brush, the same type of brush. It's just that the modifier of that brush is the one that controls the effect of it, or the behavior of the brushes. So again, super simple things to do. The only thing to keep in mind is this is ultimately pushing the geometry. So that's the reason I keep this as a Dynamesh object. If I turn on polyframe, you see there's a little bit of a, it looks a little bit weird in this case, but it's not a big deal, and I'm going to show you other tools that now you can use to fix that and create something very very nice. All right, so the way that I've been using these brushes, again, I'll show you a practical example when we get to the suit of the creature character. I think we have plenty of time, but essentially you can control the placement of these things, and this is how I've been using it with masking brushes. So I can hold Control and click and drag. That creates a mask in here. I'm going to invert that mask, and then I can use the same brush to flatten this area like this. Clear the mask, and of course, the more resolution that you have in the base mesh, the better. But now we have a nice clean surface in here. All right, so that's the that's the new brushes in a nutshell. So we have covered the knife brushes, the bevel brushes, and the modifier of the bevel brushes. So I'm going a little bit fast in here just because ideally I'm going to show you this in practice, but I want to go through all of them very quickly. So then we have the Interpolate last and the Interpolate brushes. Those ones are fantastic. Before I move on, I'm going to have a sip of water and see if there's any questions. Is cutting with boolean better than the knife brush? It is depending on what your intention is. The knife brushes are just very quick and easy, which with the booleans you can achieve a very similar thing, but you'll have to boolean a folder or boolean the subtools to get the result. Whereas with the knife brushes, it's just select a brush and do it. I would use the boolean approach to have a more control cutout piece. So if you have like a cube or a triangle, something that is very very sharp, very clear piece that you want to take out, that's when I would use the booleans. Yeah, the best part of 2021.7 is that they removed the lazy mouse from the mask lasso. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. that was one of the settings that I set up with my preferences to remove that. It wasn't the best thing for me either. Okay, so if there is any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Like I said, I have it right next to me, so I can have a look at what you guys are asking, and I can put it in here. All right, so the next ones are these Interpolate and the stroke count and adjust last. I also have the repeat last and repeat last relative, but those ones have been in ZBrush for a while. The difference is that now these are in the main stroke palette. So if you go to the stroke palette, this is basically what I grabbed. I grabbed the adjust last, all of these buttons and sliders. That's what I put in my Interpolate and adjust last. Again, these ones are pretty simple. What I can do is let's select the damp standard brush. I can go ahead and do something like that, and then do something like that, right? Two different brushes. And before I move the camera, I can click on Interpolate, and that's it. That's the Interpolate feature in a nutshell. So ZBrush is going to take a look at the first stroke and the second stroke, and it's going to interpolate a bunch of strokes. So you see there is a deformation between a flat or straight line to a curvy line. So it interpolates that. It's kind of like a linear blend. If you had a layer, for example, a sculpting layer, and you have something that is a straight, and then you have a curve a modifier or something, or like a bend curve applied to it, and in that layer you can just use the slider in that layer to control this. So this one's pretty handy. I use that quite a bit as well in certain areas to create this type of patterns and these things around here in this helmet. So let me just show you cool ways that you can use this. So again, you can click and drag for the first one, and then maybe the second one could be something smaller and a bit stronger right here. Now, the issue with this, or not the issue, but the thing that you have to keep in mind with this workflow is that ZBrush is looking at the two strokes that you created to interpolate them, like the two last strokes to interpolate them. And you can go ahead and click on this stroke count, and you can reduce that, right? And click Interpolate, and that's just going to reduce, obviously, the amount of the brushes. You can actually, this is, hopefully it's not going to crash anything, but if you crank this up quite a bit and click Interpolate, that's essentially, it's almost like doing a paneling cut with this shape. And this is another reason that I wanted to show you this, because I've been using it like this. And you can clean this up in a bunch of different ways. So let me just do one more thing. If I do this and then do another one, these are my two strokes that ZBrush is going to use to interpolate. But if I rotate the camera and then go ahead, okay, let's interpolate that. ZBrush is just going to take the last stroke, which is that little like tiny stroke in here, and the camera moving and create this this weird thing, right? Which, you know, is probably not what you want. The reason is because ZBrush treats the rotation of the camera, which is not really a rotation of the camera, like I've mentioned in the UCG course, is basically picking up the model in 3D in the canvas and changing the rotation, like moving the model. So it's not necessarily a camera. So that's why it's counted as a stroke. So that's the only thing that you have to keep in mind, that if you want to use the interpolate, you have to do 1 and 2 strokes and don't move the camera before you interpolate. So a practical way to use this, for instance, would be, for example, let's go ahead and click on the layer brush, or let's just use the standard brush actually, just keep it simple. And I'm going to hold the Alt key to do this sort of paneling. It's going to press a little bit hard in there. Okay, and then do the same thing in here. Right, and then let's go ahead and interpolate with 62 strokes. Right, so between that initial stroke and the second one, you can generate this nice sort of like tapering effect of this area right here. And like I said, there are different ways with the new tools that we can clean this up. So I'm going to show you that in the next section. But yeah, I just wanted to show you that Interpolate tool or Interpolate feature is not necessarily something that you can just use to generate patterns, you know, line patterns, or actually, let me just do this here and here and interpolate that, but not with so many. Right? So you can create this type of patterns, and it could become something quite interesting if you're doing, I don't know, something like this. I don't know what this could be, but it's a really powerful tool. But don't limit yourself to think that, okay, this is just to repeat the same stroke and generate patterns like this. You can actually create this type of interesting patterns quite easily. In fact, just you know, just by pushing, you know, something like really strong in here, and this is the same stroke, by the way. I haven't let go. And then maybe something that is smaller and not as harsh, right? And let's go ahead and interpolate that with a bunch of strokes, right? So you can generate that. In fact, another thing you can do, I actually haven't tried this, but I just thought of it. You can potentially, and this is in theory, it would work. You can push in with the first stroke and then push out with the second stroke, right? So the first one is embedding that piece, and the second one is pulling it out. And again, using 50 strokes or something like that, we can interpolate that. And nah, that's what I mean. It didn't work because it just tries to interpolate the last stroke. But anyway. I hadn't tried that before, but these type of things are quite useful, and you can do the same thing if you were to do it with the you know, with the normal effect. You can interpolate those and generate these pieces. So this is mostly how I've been using the ones that are more obvious. Oops, something froze in there. The ones that are more obvious are those lines in there. So let's go back in here, this testing queue. And I do this a lot. Like, I would recommend just to take a queue and try all these features in one place before you try to you put it inside like a proper, or apply it to a proper project. Hey Miguel, one question: will they do a section in Spanish? Try to follow. Get stuck. So again, this is meant to be a specific lesson for the UCG students. I just opened it to everyone that is interested in the new features, and that's a course that is all in English. But I'm happy to maybe do another session later on in Spanish if that helps as well. yeah, for sure, we can plan that out depending on how this one go and if it's actually helping people. All right, so that's basically the interpolate and the interpolate stroke. You can define the amount of strokes that you're interpolating, and you can use that with any brush. In fact, you can use insert brushes, which is pretty cool. So I'm gonna select this, and in this interface, I actually hit that. I'm gonna press the M key. So in my custom UI that I have for the students, I hit the IMM viewer. You can go to the preference palette and you can go to, if I remember correctly, interface, IMM viewer, and you can click on this switch to turn it on and off. In the course, I hit it because it sort of like eats up a little bit of the space of the screen, and you can just assign or not assign it, actually it is the shortcut for that. If you press the letter M, it just opens up the same thing and you can choose things from here. So I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna press M. I'm gonna select maybe just something simple, a sphere like this. And this is an IMM brush that I can click and drag, right? In fact, before I do that, I'm just gonna change the depth of the brush. So go to brush, depth, and I'm gonna push that halfway in. And this is the tool that I use, or that ZBrush uses to determine how embedded an IMM brush is. So now it's gonna embed almost like halfway in, so it creates kind of like a bolt type of thing. All right, so I'm gonna hold Control, sorry, not Control, just click and drag to create that first insert, and then I'm gonna do another tiny one in here, and those are essentially 2 strokes that you can go ahead and interpolate. So you can create something like this, maybe not that many strokes. Let's keep it simple again. 6, oops. 3, there we go. So I'm interpolating 3 strokes, so you can see there are 3 spheres interpolated, which is super handy. But you'll see as well that because the initial one is larger than the second stroke, the gap is not very consistent. So that is what you have in here in this interpolate button. You have this little, this dot in here. And whenever you see that dot in any of the ZBrush interface, like in the resolution here, the polish features, all of these things that have like a little dot, that is to give you an alternative algorithm or an alternative way to run the same process in ZBrush. So if I undo that and click on that tiny dot in there to make it open, click on Interpolate, now ZBrush is going to try to maintain that spacing a lot more. Of course, in this case, it's not necessarily the best way, but you will see it more obviously in if you do it maybe with a smaller brush size. Let's click that, and maybe increase the strokes, interpolate. Yeah, so you have a more consistent gap between them. So this is a pretty handy thing, just so you know. It is just by enabling that interpolate button right there to space out things a little bit more even, especially if you use 2 insert brushes that are different sizes. Can you change that to a Boolean operation after the stroke, Justin? I'm not entirely sure what you are referring to, but if you're referring to these insert spheres, absolutely, you can just, because they're insert meshes, you can essentially separate all of them. Because they're separate meshes, they are, and they're IMM brushes. When you insert them, they have different polygroups, so you can hide. Let's go to selection. You can hide them, right, and split hidden, and then you can take that one below, set this to subtractive, and that's it. You can turn on live booleans, right? And you can subtract those pieces as well. So super handy stuff. All right, so that covers kind of like the interpolate and the stroke. Now the repeat last and the repeat last relative are super handy as well, and that one to me, or those features to me, are extremely useful with the adjust last, which is, I would say, there are 2 things in ZBrush 2021.7 that I think are amazing in terms of boosting your productivity and your workflow, right? So if yeah, so the two of them, the two features that I love are the adjust last, and I'll show you again practical example of that, and the stager, but we're gonna get to that in a second. So the repeat last and repeat last relative, they're been in ZBrush, you know, for ages. Essentially what you can do is, let's go ahead and select damn standard brush. You can do one stroke like this, and then if you go ahead and repeat last, ZBrush is gonna look at the same stroke that you did and it's gonna repeat it. So you can keep repeating that stroke to, you know, keep pushing that in, right? So that's just repeating the last stroke. But now you can do that, and instead of doing repeat last, you can adjust that a lot easier just with the adjust last modifier, or sorry, slider. So you can just look at what's the latest of those strokes that you created. In this case, just that line, and you can adjust it, right? You can also go in negative values, and you can go and push this up like so, which is super handy, right? So this is the type of thing that you can do with the last adjust last, just one of the many things you can do with it. The repeat last relative, this is basically, it allows you to repeat the stroke, but relative to the cursor. So if I do something like this, and I repeat last, it's just gonna repeat the same in the same area, right? Whoops, I moved the camera. Remember, ZBrush treats the movement of the camera as a stroke. So if I move the camera and repeat last, I'm just gonna repeat the movement of the camera. That's it. But the other one, this repeat last relative, again, it's been in ZBrush for ages. It's just repeating the same stroke based on the cursor. So the shortcut is Shift 1. So if you hover over that, it tells you Shift 1. So I have my keyboard in here. So I'm going to show you. You can do something like this. This is one stroke, right? And then you can hover over this area and hold Shift 1, and it just repeats exactly the same stroke, but in different areas. So these are tools that have been in ZBrush for a while, but now they're coming to play, or they become like super handy when you have the adjust last, right? So the adjust last is gonna only look at the stroke that I have in here, which, you know, is fantastic, and it allows you to tweak that sort of thing. But you can also use the adjust last with the history. So you have an undo history here at the top, and what you can do is set a point before you do these strokes and adjust anything from that point onwards. So I'm gonna go back. Yeah, let's go back here, right? And I'm gonna hold the control key, and actually you don't have to go back. You can just, if you know what the starting point is, you can just hold control and click on the timeline. But, you know, just for the sake of demonstration, I went back all the way. I'm gonna hold control and click once on that point, and now I'm gonna go forward. So now ZBrush knows that there is a, let's call this a reference point that has no details, right? So that's the reference point that had none of these details. I don't know, I don't know what that is. And then we're here in the current point of the timeline where we have details, right? Sorry about the writing. Anyway, so with the adjust last, when we bring that, ZBrush is going to look at these 2 points, and it's going to say, okay, whatever has been done from that point to this point, we are going to go ahead and adjust it regardless of what it is. It could be pushing things out, pushing things in. It doesn't matter. We can adjust all of them at once. So I'm going to go ahead now that I have that point. And by the way, you can tell that there is a point set in the timeline by looking at this kind of like light gray dot. So I'm going to click on adjust last, and you see now I'm adjusting everything at once. So I can remove everything if I set it to 0, go back in negative values, so I can push, you know, this might be like an interesting way to create tentacles, or like the suckers for a tentacle type of thing, especially those dots. But you know, it's a pretty handy thing. Like I said, one of the best tools now, and it can be applied to a whole bunch of different workflows. But yeah, again, that's just making use of that history, right? And the reason we don't have the history for everything else is because we split those those points in here. So the points are actually in here. So if I wanted to, let's set a point in there. Oops. All right, something like that, right? So this is the original one. I set a point, reference point right there at the beginning. I should be able to just adjust all of those things, including that original bevel that I did with the brush. So I can literally just go back to what what I had at the beginning. So yeah, hopefully that helps. I'm just gonna duplicate that mesh so that we have. Oh, by the way, if you ever find that there is like this red dot, that can give you problems, and that it just means that there might be a subtool that already has a reference point, which is this one in this case. So I can just click on that and remove it, and you'll see now that red line is gone. So that's kind of like an important distinction to make about the how this feature works. All right, so we have done. Hang on, I think I have. Oh, this is the reason why some things were a little bit wonky. I had the touch mode of my Cintiq on. All right, now I can move a little bit easier. Cool. So where were we? Yeah, so we have done interpolate and interpolate last relative. Sorry, repeat last and replay last, relative, interpolate, stroke count, and now the adjust last. Now the adjust last, I'm gonna go back to it again because it's one of the best ones, and or the best features in the new version, and it can be used in a whole bunch of different ways. All you have to do all you have to remember about this is that whatever your last stroke is, regardless of what it is, it can be adjusted quite easily. And then you can use the history to adjust multiple ones. So this is something that I've been using for, let's say, doing some kind of paneling effect. You can use the layer brush to do something like that, right? And then you can just adjust it, which is pretty cool. So what I did there was I was adjusting the adjustment. So it could become a little bit, a bit meta. So if I do something like this, which is not very, let's just do it again. Just gonna try to find an angle that you can find, that you can see easily. So if I do this, right, this is not very strong, and I can take my adjust last and I push it to 5. So that adjustment that I just did there, that becomes my latest change or my latest stroke. So if I do it again, ZBrush is now going to look not at the actual stroke that I created, but at the difference that adjustment did before. So I can just exaggerate that, and now this becomes my new one, so I can do the same one more time. So you see it's kind of like exponentially adding, because what you're doing is adjusting a little bit, and then it takes that piece and adjust it a little bit more, and so on and so forth. And now that I have this extraction or extrusion, I can go back and do the negative value, and I can just push this quite a bit, and I decide where to go. So this is super handy, right? Now, hopefully this helps. I'll show you more of this in the next section. So we're gonna take a quick break. I'm gonna grab some water, and we continue. But the stager, the masking stuff, and all of that, those are tools that are pretty easy to use, and I'm gonna apply them, or I'm gonna use them when I apply them in the character. So very briefly, what these do: stager, it allows you to set a home stage, and if I were to, let's go ahead and append a ring 3D, just to show you a bit of the feature, and then we use it a bit better. Right, so we have this ring 3D as a separate subtool. I can go ahead and enable symmetry, right? And we can do maybe with a damp center brush, so you can see a bit better what I'm doing. So you can do these type of things, and because we have symmetry, it works great. But let's say that we're working on a character, right? And I'll show you that in a second. And I want to place this somewhere else. That's where the home stage and home on target stage come into play. And again, this one is the second feature that I think is the most valuable from this update, at least for me in terms of my workflow. I can go ahead and set a home stage at this point where I have the symmetry and all of that, and I can see it and I can play around with it and edit it or whatever. But then I can just use something like the Gizmo 3D. Let's turn off symmetry now. Maybe scale it down, rotate it. Let's just place it in there. Let's say that that's, I don't know, that's a ring that is going to be there in the final object. All I have to do is set a target stage. Now, these two switches are under the geometry palette at the bottom. So geometry, stager, these two right here. And then you have the switch stage, which is what I have in here, right? So this switch stage allows you to jump between that original state and the new one, okay? So this is not necessarily the same thing, but it's kind of like an older feature that it's that it's been in ZBrush for ages, which is, I don't even remember what it is now. Yeah, the set pivot point and clear pivot point. This used to be a way of moving the center of the world to a piece that was off the center of the world, but you know, it was quite handy, and you can use the same thing with local symmetry. But the great thing about this is that you're not just limiting yourself as moving your piece outside of that center of the world. You can actually rotate, scale, and edit this as many times as you want to. So, for example, if I want to go back, let's click on switch stage to go back to the center and reuse symmetry, which if I'm in this state, you cannot use symmetry. In fact, you can try to turn on local symmetry, but still the symmetry is not necessarily going to work as well. You could use posable symmetry, I suppose, but yeah, that's not the idea. So again, let's go back here and let's use the move brush, and I'm just gonna do something like this. I don't know what this is going to be. It's just another abstract piece to show you the details or the features, sorry. But obviously what I'm doing here is just stretching the polygon, right? Or stretching the polygons. I can go ahead and switch back and see how that looks in the actual placement of that piece, right? So if you think about, I don't know if you can see it in here. You won't be able to see it properly, but the character that I use in my UCG course has like a little bag, yeah, like a cross bag. I don't know how you call that. It's just like a purse, something. It's just a bag, a leather bag, and that is on one side, right? So that for that specific object, you can work in this way. You can just have a home stage where you have the ability to keep the symmetry and all of that, and then you have a target stage where you can actually place that in the model and see the effect. Now, what's great about this is that, let's go back to switch stage. I can go ahead and dynamesh this. So I literally just changed completely the topology. Let me just smooth this out a bit, right? In fact, let's just do insert brush, and I'm gonna select something like this. Bring that in. Right, and clear that mask. So I just literally use insert meshes and change the topology with Dynamesh. If I wanted to, I can re-Dynamesh that as well, but I'm not gonna do it just because I wanna show you that anything that you do in here, it is translated perfectly fine to the position or to the target stage. So this is one of the, like I said, one of the greatest things about the new, well, this is one of the greatest features of the new version in terms of workflow, because you can literally work for production in a T pose or an A pose, but you can have all the assets or accessories of a character in that T pose, so that you can, take advantage of like the center of the world symmetrical areas, radial symmetry, any of that. So if I go back and go into solo, we can also turn on radial symmetry in this y-axis, right? We can add, that sort of thing. We can also use dampen the brush like that, right? So you can take advantage of all of those tools and then switch to this stage, and everything is gonna work just fine. So one of the best features, right? And I'm going to show you again, hopefully, in a second. Again, I keep saying the same thing, but I want to cover the basics first and then show you a bit of how I've been using it and show you more tricks that are pretty cool. All right, so that's essentially it. Now, if you have multiple pieces, that's why these all home and all target are for. So in other words, if I take this cube and I can set a home state or stage, move that out of the way, rotate it, scale it, or whatever else, set it to target stage. Now what I have is a couple of tools that are they have different stages basically, right? So I can just go one by one and click switch and switch to bring them all back, or I can use these new buttons that makes it more automated. So every subtool that has a target stage and a home stage, let's set them all to target, so that's it, or all to home, right? So this is again, I keep going on about it, but it is one of the most useful tools, at least for the workflow that I use, to be able to just go between the kind of like the pose asset, the pose accessory, let's say, and the one in the center of the world that you can utilize all of this. And you can retopologize or use zero measure. So that's another great thing about it. Let's say let's take this. Well, let's just switch that to the solo mode. I'm gonna redynamesh with a very low resolution, smooth everything out, redynamesh again, and I'm gonna use the zero measure just to show you that you can use a cleaner topology. Let's reduce that in half. Right? Pretty clean topology. And you can still maintain the home stage and the target stage. So essentially you can do dynameshing, sketching, everything that you want, and you can still see a visual of where your asset or your mesh looks in the scene that you're building. And once you're ready, you just simply go back to this home stage, do all the retopology. You can even do projection if you have two of these of the same, and then you have like a pretty clean way to generate this zero measure with a center line in the middle, so you have symmetry or like a clean topology on both sides, at least that are symmetrical. And then you have the ability to send that back in and use subdivision levels, all that good stuff. All right, so that's this stager, amazing stuff. Now let's go back to this guy. Let's set it to switch stage, and I'm just gonna turn that off. And I'm gonna go back to these things just to show you some of the new other stuff. So the masking stuff. So you have the mask change points, the boost mask, the loot mask, then you have mirror biposable symmetry and flip biposable symmetry. These ones are super handy, but if I have time, I'll show you. That basically, it's pretty simple. If you have like posable symmetry, if I go back to my character, which has very symmetrical pose, you can go ahead and use a mask pen and mask something like this. And because this one has a posable symmetry, I can just go ahead and mirror by posable symmetry, so it just mirrors that mask. Obviously in this case is not it's not very handy, but you could let's just so that you can see more what I mean about this. I'm just gonna rotate this. All right, so now we have this in a pose, right? If I go ahead and I want to mask out the hands of this character, I just mask one of the hands, right? And I can mirror by posable symmetry. And because it is a symmetrical character, I just took that mask on one side and I just mirrored to the other one. That's the same. So it's pretty basic, but quite handy. And you can do the same thing by flipping. So I can flip by posable symmetry and it's just moving it to one side. And if I want to, I can just mirror from that side, right? So that's just a very quick and useful way. Let me undo all of that to work with masking. So that's the simple one. All right, let's do it here. But the really awesome ones are the mask change points and boost and the loot mask. So if I go ahead and use something like the damp standard brush, I can, or let's use the clay brush so it's a little bit more obvious. I can go ahead and, you know, do something like this, right? And I can move around. This doesn't have anything to do with the strokes or anything. It just remembers what are the change points. So if I go back between this state and this state, that's the change points. And I can click on mask change points. And if I click that, ZBrush now is gonna mask out those details. That's another crazy boost to the productivity, because now I can just easily isolate those points, right? And I can continue, to work on them. So for example, I can invert that. Whoops. I can go ahead and invert that mask, holding Control and click once on the canvas, and I can just go ahead and polish just that area without affecting the rest. I can inflate that piece. I can bring in the trim dynamic, and essentially anything else that you want to do with this donut shape. But the mask is gone, right? Sorry, the mask is there, is not gone. So a cool way to use this would be to, for example, use, let's actually use another brush. Let's use the bevel flat, right? So I'm going to click and drag, and I'm going to flat all of that. And I can click on mask change points. So now I have these points that are masked, and they're essentially just restricting it to the change points. So I can invert the mask, for example, and bring in the gizmo center to the unmasked areas, and I can just move that like so, right? So this specific way is, or this methodology is what I use for some of these more rounded shapes that you see here. Can't remember which ones exactly, but I did use that, for example, in here. Some of the rounded areas, some of them are insert meshes, but some of them are just using that technique. So I would just use the bevel brush to bevel that point, and then it creates that nice soft mask that you can use, with the Gizmo 3D. You can rotate it, and I actually scale that in specific axis like so, just to make it a bit more rounded. But it's quite clean, right? Now, if you don't want this to be as soft, like the transition between the mask and unmasked areas, let me undo all of that. Go back to here. That's when the boost mask and the dilute mask come into play. So the boost mask is going to is the equivalent to sharpen and blurring the mask, but the big difference, they're not blurring or sharpening. The big difference is that whatever you do, like the dilute or the boost, is going to restrict to only the change points. So if I boost the mask, I can keep clicking boost, 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 boost many times, and it's going to get to a point that the mask is not going to expand anymore, because there's not going to be any other change points. So now this is a pretty sharp, it's a pretty sharp mask, but it's only restricted to the change points. That's the big difference. That is pretty good. And dilute mask as well. So if I click on dilute mask, it's the same thing. Just it's kind of like a blurring that mask. Maybe I went too crazy with with the boosting, but it is kind of like let's undo a few of those. Yeah, I think I clicked too many times. But now this is a pretty sharp mask that I can invert, bring in the gizmo, centered, and let's just move that in the y-axis. It's now going to give you a pretty solid piece, right? And again, this is a Dynamesh, so you can just redynamesh and clean this up a little bit. Of course, I wasn't trying to get that piece, but that's essentially how it works. Now, another thing you can do, you can hold, let's use the mask pen. You can create a mask like this, just so that we can restrict the effect of this flat brush a bit more, right to this area. Oops. And mask change points. Now, the only thing that I didn't think through is that the masking. If I remove the mask, that's not gonna allow me to change the mask points. However, there is another way to go about it, and that brings me to the polygrouping, right? So if I enable these, I can tell ZBrush to group the last change points. So let me undo all of that and do something like this These are the change points. I can polygroup visible, right? So that's what the polygroup, turn this line, that's what these group change points, this button does, is just the same thing as the mask. Is going to look at what are the change points and is going to polygroup them, which is probably one of the best features as well. All of these features are incredibly useful for productivity and enhancing your workflow. By the way, all of these masking tools are under the masking palette, obviously. Forgot to mention that. So these are the points that I have in here. So you have the mask change points, the boost mask, the loot mask, flip, and mirror. So all of these 5 buttons right here, that's what I have in the masking stuff. And the polygroups and polypaint area. So if you go to polygroups, the one that I just used is this one right here, group change points. So that's the one that, based on the change of the points that you have done, that's what you get, right? So now you can go ahead and, isolate these, for example, right? And mask it out, holding control and click outside, bring the rest, and, you can do anything that you need to do with that masked area, right? So you can invert that and you can start polishing just this bead if you wanted to. You can concentrate on, further adding details with a clay brush or whatever you want in just this area. But it becomes really, really handy. Now, if you have more polygroups, right? If you had more polygroups for the rest of the pieces, you can just you can do polish by features, right? Or polish by groups. You see, it sort of cleans the difference of the between the polygroups, but it just softens everything else. So you can do a clay polish after that. So this various different ways to clean up and polish the surface, but having the ability to just mask out the change points or polygroup those, it is just amazing. So one of the cool things as well you can do is, and I'm going to show you this in the character. Let's use the clay brush. You can do something like this, and as soon as you do that, you can just go ahead and click on polygroups or group change points, right? Which you can also do the same thing manually by masking change points and then hold Control and W to assign a polygroup. So it's, using the group change points just saves you a step in that workflow. And if I want to, make sure that this is a nicer set of, like the edge around is a bit nicer, I can hold Control and Shift, select that, and I can just polish by features a few times. Right, so that's just cleaning that up, and now we have, without affecting anything else, I have that piece in here, and I can, now select that, hold Control to select to add a mask, invert that mask, bring in the gizmo, and push that. So incredibly powerful stuff. By the way, so this is part of what I wanted to show you. So now these are the change points, so I can group that as well. And mask that out. Oh, it's not working. When you have mask and you use the change points, that could be a little bit tricky, but yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to show you something else, but that's essentially the different workflows that I would use with the change groups and the change mask. Again, these things that I have in here, they're more like enhancement to current workflows, not necessarily like a brush that does something specific. These can be used in a whole bunch of different ways. So we'll get to that. So the last thing, just before a quick break, and then we actually go into the tricks and tips using them in a character, is the cool extras. So this is a pretty simple thing, but I think it's quite good. I mean, there are other cool extras, like in the preference palette. Now you can have the import export settings are all in here. They're all global. This is a little bit more advanced maybe. So, depending on your level of proficiency in ZBrush and how you use it in your workflows, this might not be as relevant. But for example, for me, making sure that the groups are turned off, exporting with groups if I have polygroups, and if I'm going to use it in Maya or other 3D applications, if you export it with groups, then and you import it without, like, just with the default settings, is going to split the meshes based on the polygroups. So it's going to separate that. And that's something that if you had a bunch of different subtools and you want to do bakes or something like that outside ZBrush, it was a little bit painful to do it through every single subtool. So now, this is the type of things that have been added to the new version. So this is now a global setting, so it's pretty powerful. So again, this thing, the MO and the model opacity, that's something to do with references. So for example, I can go to the texture and I'm going to select, let's go ahead and select the ZBrush logo. Cool. So that's the ZBrush logo. I can go ahead now and go to the image plane with that image selected, and I can click load image. So now it is basically adding that image as my image plane, and I can try to match that logo and start working on this to try to match that logo. Before, what I used to do was, let's actually open up or get out of solo mode so you can see more of the subtools, and let's go. I don't know if this one still has, no, I already moved it. All right, just move this around. So before, I used to just go to transform palette, and I can go to transparency and ghost, or not, depending on what you want. And this transparent allows me to see a little bit better some of the selected subtools, right? So that I can match it. But the rest of them are not necessarily, transparent or transparent enough. You can also use ghost. Again, this is up to you. But now what you have is the ability to control the model opacity from just this slider right here. And this is a lot, it's a different transparency. It's kind of like multiplying the effect. So you can also play around with changing the material as well, if it gives you a much better reference point, right? But you can control the opacity of that model from that slider right here, or you can toggle this MO, which is the model opacity, on and off very easily. So this is something that if you do like you try to do hyper realistic characters, or if you're trying to model something based on a concept and you have like a character sheet or something that is like the reference, this is something quite useful that I would put in my UI, and that is within the texture palette. If you open up the reference views here on the image plane, sorry, let's do that again. This model opacity and MO, that's the two new things that I have now in the UI, and I also have the front because I can just toggle this off from here, and I will toggle off the with clicking on this one, toggles off the image plane so that I can keep sculpting, right? And I can just select that texture again and turn that on if I want to. But a little extra that I think is super valuable, especially to use that as reference. Alrighty, so that covers basically all of the new stuff. Again, there are like a couple of more things that I haven't shown you, which are the flip by possible symmetry and mirror by possible symmetry, but that has to do with polypaint, and also the regroup visible. Let's just show you the regroup visible very quickly. Let's actually go to this one that has multiple polygroups. So if I go ahead and click on regroup visible, let's turn everything off except that one. Click on regroup visible. Now ZBrush is going to look at whatever you have in here, any polygroup, and it's just gonna cycle through different different IDs for the polygroups. So that's gonna give you different polygroups, right? But it's quite handy, especially if you were to, let's say, hide this, right? And I wanna just give a different polygroup to this visible area, right? Instead of hiding everything and just having instead of starting hiding pieces to just have the piece that I want to give a single polygroup, I just need to go ahead and click on regroup visible, and ZBrush is going to look at whatever is visible. Is going to give me different polygroups, maintaining the ones that I have, and now I have two sets of polygroups in here. And you can do this like so as well, and let's group visible. So it's going to maintain, let's say, that difference in the polygroups in here, all of that, and I can bring everything, and and I can keep iterating, just regrouping everything different. So super handy stuff. Again, it's more like an enhancement of the workflow. I'll show you some of this stuff as well in just a second. One more thing before we move on. So with this character, if I go ahead and paint something, let's go ahead and divide a couple more times. And I'm going to select the standard brush. I'm going to turn off RGB and turn off Z-add and select, let's fill the object with white and use red color. So now I can paint, right? That's where these flip possible symmetry and mirror by possible symmetry come into play, which are basically you can paint something now with polypaint, and then you can use mirror to mirror that on the other side, or you can go ahead and flip that geometry. Oh, sorry, that painting, and again works with possible symmetry. That's why the name flip by possible symmetry or mirror by possible symmetry. So you can now just have your model, and then if you decide to change something on one side, paint something, you can mirror it. So pretty handy stuff. Now you notice that when I clicked on mirror by possible symmetry, this area also gets it's almost like diluting the or washing out the color. So it's not a very strong color. It's almost like taking that full-on red that I had here and splitting the intensity in two. So if you want to fix that, if you want to have that, what you can do as well is let's see if that's going to work. Yeah. So the mask change points, when you add polypaint, that's actually, it's not necessarily changing the points, but you are adding something new to those points. So that polypaint that I just did, you can click on mask change points, and it's gonna mask out that painted area, which is awesome as well. So thinking about little details that you can just drag in and paint. In fact, let's fill object again. Let's change the alpha to alpha, or maybe alpha 25, and change the stroke to drag rect. Click and drag, maybe a bit more resolution. Click and drag, right? So I have this piece in here. Imagine if I'm doing some sort of like a lizard thing. I can go ahead and click on mask change points, and now these are the points that have been changed. Again, it's nothing to do with the volume, it's more about the polypaint. And I can go ahead now and I can flip that mask by possible symmetry, right? So now the same thing is in the other side, just the mask. I can invert that mask, and now I can flip the polypaint. So now that reassures me, that actually tells me that these two things are just fine. Now another thing you can do is let's go back once, invert that mask. So I'm gonna turn off the polypaint just to show you that I have this mask on this side. I can also go ahead and just click on mirror by possible symmetry, right? So now I have the mask in both sides as well. And if I turn polypaint, I already have the polypaint. Something we can do is invert that, and I can go ahead and use the inflate, for example, right? And so that way you can maintain the best of both worlds. So you have the mask area, so you can control where you are those details, and then you also have the polypaint. And this inflated, let me just undo that, because this is another thing you can do. If I inflate that, right, those are my new change points. You can regroup, group change points. So now we have a different polygroup in those areas that were masked, or you can, mask change points again. So again, this is more about the workflow really than anything. So now I have these mask change points, and I can boost or dilute that mask, and so on and so forth. But I'm gonna undo all of that. Just wanted to briefly finish the set of features in ZBrush. All right, cool. I'm gonna reset that brush. And now we are ready to move on and start maybe adding some, you know, basically show you the actual features in action of how I've been using it to create some kind of like a suit. This part is going to be pretty easy, pretty quick, I hope. And yeah, it's just to show you more of the tricks, something that you can use in your workflow. And essentially how I created this bit and piece. So before I take a quick break, just a literally 2 minutes break while I go for some water, is there any question that you guys have so far that I can plan for answering in the next section of the stream? Hey Rai, hey Javier, good to see you here. No worries. Cool. I know there is a little bit of a delay in the chat or in the stream, so I'm just gonna go ahead and take the break right now, and when I come back, I'll read the questions if there's anything on the chat. All right, so bear with me. I'll be back in 2 seconds. Well, 2 minutes. All right, we're back. And now we're gonna start with with the actual fun stuff. So hopefully that initial section helped out, just to like a quick rundown through the different features. But now we're gonna actually put that into action, like use those tools. So let me just reset the current brush. Okay. So one of the first things that I should say is that again, because this is for the UCG students, don't try to replace workflows with new features. That's one of the things that I think is very important to highlight. New features are to enhance specific workflows, but there might be other ways that if you're used to it and it just works for you, you don't have to move to something else. And I'll give you a clear example of that. Just because when you have like the ability to use different tools or new tools, you might just want to jump straight away into them and just use those instead of like something that you feel more comfortable with, which is fair enough. All I'm saying is that the new tools might be might give you ideas of how to create something, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best way to do it. That's ultimately what I'm trying to say. So oops, I think something just froze. We might have to restart ZBrush, but it's all good. So okay, I'm gonna duplicate the mesh, the body, and I'm gonna divide this a couple of times. This one as well, just to smooth it out. But this one, the duplication, I'm gonna delete the lower. Right. So what I was saying before about, adopting new features, but also thinking about existing workflows that you feel comfortable with, is this, right? So for the panels, the blocking of the setup of this suit, you can do it in many different ways, right? So one of the easiest way to create panels nowadays with ZBrush is the mesh project, right? So you can select mesh project and just literally mask or use the mask brushes to mask on an area and produce a panel. So that's a very simple way to approach it. But again, it's just about how you use it. Just think about the new features as enhancing your workflows if you're used to it, or if you already know how to work with certain tools. Just see if the new features actually enhance and make your life easier, or if you can control the surfaces in the same way. It's all about the outcome. So I don't know if that makes sense, but I'll give you more examples of that. So what I'll do is I'm going to select my knife brushes with the B radius enabled, and I'm going to select let's use the knife curve, right? By the way, one of the cool things about these brushes as well is that they work with symmetry. So I can enable symmetry, which is something that I think the trim brushes, they don't work with symmetry. This one does. So remember, the B radius is based on the size of my brush. So I'm gonna reduce my brush size like that. And now the whole point or the whole idea with this process is to block out the shapes of the main shapes. If this was some kind of like hard surface suit or some sci-fi stuff that I like. So I'm gonna hold Control and Shift, then Alt, and just go through it. Oops, let's do that again. Actually, I'm gonna do some kind of like shoulder pad like that. I'm gonna hold the Alt key and let go. So again, remember that's using the B radius, so that's sort of following the radius of my brush in here. And because I hold the Alt key, I remove that piece. Like I just use the knife brush to remove that piece. And that's it, right? The next thing I want to do, and again, what I'm doing right now is trying to block the main areas of that suit, which is what I did for the head as well, for the helmet. Concentrating on the big forms first and using some of the new tools to get me there faster. So another cool thing that you can do with these brushes, with the knife brushes, is you can hold Control and Shift to access them. And you don't have to go all the way through. You can just stop right in the gap, holding the Alt, and you'll see it doesn't go all the way, right? It just stops whenever it finds a gap. So that's another fantastic thing. So you can go and do this, holding Alt, and you can keep cutting this into pieces if you wanted to. I'm gonna keep that one. All right, so let's do something here for the arm as well. And as you can see, it's doing it in the mirror symmetry, which is awesome. I'm gonna do something maybe from this angle, holding the Alt. Every time that I draw a new curve, I'm essentially holding the Alt key just to draw a new or to cut that piece instead of, if I don't do Alt, it's just gonna give me this, which is not what I want in this case. So I'm gonna do something for maybe the chest. Like so. In this case, it didn't do the symmetry because I went all the way through. But again, I don't have subdivision level, so I can just mirror and weld everything just to get the same sort of clean line. I'm gonna do the same thing in here with a bit of a sharper line. And I'm doing all of it from the camera angle, but we can tweak that later. Let's just go ahead and do a couple more, maybe something here for the wrist. Something like that. And maybe something for the neck, maybe from a different camera angle. Holding Alt. Alt. By the way, you can also press the spacebar to reposition your curves after you draw them. So Control Shift Alt and then press the spacebar and Alt. All right. Another cool thing, and this again, this is one of the reasons these new brushes are so powerful, is that you can just go ahead and do something like, maybe with the knife lasso, just to do something else, something like this, right? Hold the Alt key, so that again, and it sort of like clips that area. Maybe that is too close, and I'm gonna reduce my brush size so that it gives me a smaller gap. Oops. Control and Shift. I'm trying to design something that makes sense. Yeah, something like this, and maybe we can hold Control and Shift and hold the Alt key and just, that's probably gonna be easier to do it with this knife. Something like that. We can remove that later on. I don't know. This is this is gonna be something quick. I think it works. All right. So this is kind of like the blocking of what I wanted to do. Again, for this type of panels, you could very easily use something like the projection or the mesh project. I think it's called, yeah, mesh project. But I'm used to this workflow, so that's the reason I'm using the new tools or the new features with this workflow. Right. So let me just have a look at the chat. Awesome. Yeah, it's a knife brushes are pretty awesome as well. Does the knife brush completely replace the trim curve brushes? Not necessarily. No. It depends really. So to be honest, if I hold Control and Shift, if I go ahead and use the trim brushes, the trim brush is going to give you a different type of topology as a resulting mesh. I don't see. I cannot think from the top of my head like a situation where the all trim brushes are going to be more powerful than the knife brushes. But yeah, if I think of something, I'll let you know. Yeah, you still have the all brushes available to you. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and enable the polyframe, and this guy already had some polyframes. Remember, if I want to polygroup, and this is one of the reasons this new feature of polygrouping is really powerful. I can regroup everything, but it's going to maintain all the different polygroups. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to remove everything that I don't need, right? That's why I have a duplicate of that mesh. So I'm going to hold Control and Shift and just go through all the pieces that I want to keep. Invert that. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And I'm gonna go ahead and use another tool, which is for you guys would be under the polygrouping. You can click on auto groups. In the UCG, we use that quite a bit as well. So we have it in the UI here. So I can click on auto group. And that just automatically groups everything that is separate. So I can keep removing pieces that I don't need. So maybe this one, maybe one of these, and the head, and maybe this part here. But the rest are pieces that I can keep and I can work on for that suit, right? So all I have to do now is delete hidden here, which for anyone that is not part of the UCG with this UI would be on the geometry, modify topology, delete hidden. Okay. Cool. So now we have done that. I'm going to mirror and weld just to have the same polygroups on both sides. That's just gonna be the easier thing. Now, one little trick that I can give you, or if you have something that already has like a nice topology and you don't wanna, or you have subdivision levels and you don't want to mirror and well to generate the polygroups, and you can't be bothered just going one by one and polygrouping, like essentially doing this type of thing and then polygrouping and so on and so forth, and you don't want to do mirror and well, you can also go to the polygroup palette, polypaint palette, and you can polypaint from polygroups. So you can click on that, right? And then you can use the flip. Well, in this case, I don't think I have the possible symmetry anymore, but you could potentially, if you have a nicer topology, you can just mirror. Yeah, I don't have the symmetry anymore, but you can mirror that, and this is just an extra thing in case you don't want to do the mirror well. So you mirror those the polypaint, and then you can just go to polygroup, and then you can do polygroup from polypaint with this button right here, and that allows you to generate polygroups based on the color, which is pretty handy. All right, so let's mirror that, and let's get out of Solo. So now we have those pieces in here that are single-sided meshes. So what I like to do is, and again, so far I've only used the knife brushes, but the rest of this can be easily done with other features in ZBrush. So we have a fairly decent topology. It's just the edges that are not necessarily working. So what I'll do is I'm going to click on I'm going to leave adaptive on. I'm going to click on half, and I'm going to zero mesh this whole thing. And now we have a nice zero mesher. Let's do that again. Maybe not too much. I'm just going to give the Z mesher some help, because there's like a tiny polygroup in here that I don't want. So I'm going to use the select lasso to hide these. This is just a bit of a cleanup before I run the zero mesher, because it's trying to keep those. And let's delete hidden, and let's try that one more time. In fact, before I run it with a half, I'm just gonna zero mesh it, just so that we get pretty much the same thing but with a cleaner topology. And now we can start going in subdivision, or going low in low subdivisions. Again, there's some areas that can be improved even further, but for the most part, I think, again, I'm gonna dynamesh this again. Just want to have like a cleaner topology for the next step, which again, it can be in a number of ways. So you can use the zero mesher, the C modeler, and then extrude every single piece. But what I'll do is go to the dynamic subdivision, which is something else that we use quite a bit in the UCG course. We don't have it here. But I'm going to click on dynamic just to smooth that area, right? And we also going to use the thickness, and the thickness allows you to dynamically generate that thickness for those panels, right? So right now, this looks pretty good. Actually, let's go out of dynamic. I just realized that I don't like to have this as a loop in here. Doesn't really make sense. So I'm gonna delete those, and here at the back, there we go. And I'm gonna delete those as well. So it's just a bit of cleanup really, what I'm doing in here. So, all right, let's go back, dynamic on, and we can control the thickness with this slider. All right. Cool, so that's working fine. Again, this doesn't look like anything super interesting just yet, but we're gonna use some of the new features in a second. So one thing I like to do is, I don't want this to be as harsh. I want something a bit more kind of like padding, more like a strong fabric rather than like metal or anything like that. So one thing you can do is, first of all, go to crease, and I'm gonna click on crease all. So that's going to remove all creasing that you might have in the edges, just in case. And then go back to dynamic subdivision, and we're going to click on post subdivision, so that ZBrush doesn't apply that subdivision after the extrusion. So now we have a nice set of edges that we can control. If you want something sharper, you can just leave that on, right? And if you want to control the amount of sharpness of that edge, you can crease by polygroups, which is what we currently have here in the crease panel. In fact, let me just show you that. It's a nice trick. It doesn't have anything to do with what we're doing right now, but it's, this is a pretty sharp and clean edge, but if you want something just a tiny bit more in terms of the beveling, so this is something you can do. You can crease by polygroups, this one right here, and you'll see it just changes a little bit. That's just to make the edge, to make the border a crisp edge or a creased edge. And then once you have that, you can determine the level of creasing or crispness or sharpness of the crease from this slider. So if I can reduce that to let's go for 2, and then we can increase the smooth subdivision, something like that. Oops. It's not very easy to see. I had the post subdivision enabled, so turn that off, and now we can control that creasing level from this slider. So you see, it's just adding a tiny bit. So even if you're doing something like super sharp or hard surface, having a little bit of bevel does help. But yeah, I don't want any of that, so I'm just gonna uncrease all. I want to keep everything relatively, soft in that section. But yeah, so now we have this initial state. And now we can go ahead to the dynamic, and we can go ahead and apply that. So when we apply it, we just immediately go back to the subdivision level, which you can keep if you wanted to. I'm going to go ahead and just go straight to Dynamesh, just deleting that if I needed to. Right now I don't need to, but I'm just going to use Dynamesh because this is something that I could use to add more details and to further enhance whatever we have in here. So now we're going to start using some of the tools, the new tools in ZBrush. All right, so the first thing that you can do, for example, is to inflate everything just to tighten the difference a bit more of these pieces. So that's something else you can use. I'm going to use the move topological as well with symmetry, and I'm just going to adjust the placement of these things. So for example, this area right here, I need to make sure that it reads as a soft piece because it doesn't really make sense. The character wouldn't be able to move the arms if it is like a solid piece. So that's the type of thing that I would start thinking about at this stage. Same thing with this. This is kind of like action rather than like a hard shell. Otherwise, oops, everything froze for a second. Yeah, so I was saying otherwise the character wouldn't be able to move that. All right, so let's start with something cool that we can do. Let's say here for the shoulder, I want some kind of like a tube or something that can connect to something else. Not sure yet, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and bring in a new mesh. I'm gonna click on append. I'm gonna click on cylinder. All right. I think something's going on with the internet and things are slowing down just a bit. So hopefully it's not affecting the stream too much. So with that mesh, I'm going to go into solo mode and I'm going to bring in the Gizmo 3D, scale this like so, maybe. And I'm going to bring in the C modeler, turn on polyframe. I'm going to right click. In fact, let's not do any of that just yet. I'm going to show you some more tools, some of the new tools instead. All right, so I'm going to turn this into a Dynamesh object, right? And I'm going to go ahead and also set this to the stager, to the home stage. And I'm going to go ahead and scale this down, and I'm going to place it in here. So essentially in the area that I want to have this piece, there we go. And now I can just go into solo mode and switch. Oh, sorry. Let's set the target, very important. And now we can switch to that home stage and we can start playing around with this. So the first thing is I'm going to enable symmetry, go to transform, set the radial symmetry with the y-axis. That's the one in the kind of like the center. And I'm going to increase this radial count to something like 32. So we have plenty of instances of this brush. So I can smooth this a lot faster, right? And then I can use the move brush, that sort of thing, right? But I'm going to use another brush that is new, again, that I show you, which is this bevel brush. And we can use that brush with radial symmetry. So essentially do this very quickly. So it creates, I'm just adding a little bit of beveling there just to create that crease. And then you can use the smooth brush. And because this is a Dynamesh, we can re-Dynamesh the whole thing. So that gives me a very nice piece, very quickly. So that's another really cool thing that you can do with the bevel brushes and use them in radial, with radial symmetry. Now for this piece as well, I'm gonna go ahead and use, let's go for the clay brush, for example, and with symmetry. I'm also gonna show you this without the line, but with color. And I'm gonna hold the Alt key just to push that in, right? And again, because I want this to be a little bit like stronger, I can use my adjust last, right? So I can push that in and then keep pushing that as well. There we go. Redynamesh the whole thing. I can smooth out all of that. I can then use another bevel brush, like the flat edge, and I can flatten that piece like so. Redynamesh, smooth everything, and I can keep doing the same thing. I mean, the fact that this is radial symmetry, it just makes things a lot easier, but you can combine that existing workflow, that existing feature of the radial symmetry with with everything that we've been doing, that I've been showing you in this stream, which is essentially the new brushes on the new features. All right, so something else that we can do is let's use the clay brush again. I'm just gonna use that clay brush to clean that up, but you can use the group change points. So now we have a nice polygroup, and I'm gonna go ahead and do the same thing here with the trim dynamic. So I can use the trim dynamic to make sure that this is a nice and flat edge that is also changing some points, maybe not everywhere. So let's do that a bit better. Right, so that ensures that this is a nice and flat edge, but also we can polygroup it, right? So now we have these two polygroups working really, really nicely. And we can go ahead and now use something like polish by groups. So in the deformation palette, you have these polish by groups. So if I get closer, you'll see that even though this is a very low res mesh because of the Dynamesh, if I use the polish by groups, ZBrush is going to respect that, that crisp edge between the groups and clean this up quite a bit. I can do that a few times. Just by doing that, I have something very, very clean with polygroups that we can, further use. Something else you can do is, for example, holding Control and Shift. I'm going to select this one, and also I'm going to press V in my keyboard to be able to visualize everything. And we can go to, again, auto groups in here. So now these are two different polygroups. If I don't like the colors of these, I can just go ahead and use the regroup visible, right? Or bring everything. Now we have 1, 2, 3, and 4 polygroups that I can regroup if I wanted to. Let's go ahead and use the knife brush as well, the curve, and I'm gonna turn off symmetry. I want to clip that in there, holding Shift so that it's a nice and straight. Oops, I have B radius enabled. Control Shift, and again holding Shift so that it's a nice and clean area. We have another polygroup in there, And we're starting to build something that it looks pretty cool, right? At this point it's pretty simple, but let's go ahead and make it a bit more interesting, right? So I'm gonna use let's see. First of all, I'm gonna increase my Dynamesh resolution quite a bit to 500 or 400, and it's gonna double check that it's gonna be good. Yeah, it's probably enough. I'm gonna do a polish by groups again just to sharpen those corners. Be a bit more. All right, and I'm going to use the damp standard brush with radial symmetry, and I can do some nice indentations in here. Let's go ahead and do something like this, and then another one in here, right? And hopefully you know what I'm going with this. I can go ahead and interpolate that with maybe, I don't know, 20 strokes. See how that looks. So maybe that's too much. And I think let's do it with the layer brush, because I don't have it in here. So let's go with layer brush. Just because the damp standard brush, it's not as even as what I wanted to. So I'm going to hold the Alt key. That's one. That's two. I mean, you can leave it like this if you wanted to. Just want to show you something else. Interpolate. And I think I found the problem. So if you do this, let's say from top to bottom, and then from bottom to top, ZBrush is going to interpolate flipping those things. So it's going to create this this effect, which is not what we want. So you can interpolate it with radial symmetry. That's the point. But I think I'm just going to keep it simple and do something like that. Right? So first thing we can do is mask by change points, and again polygroup that if we wanted to, so that we have more control of this afterwards. So we can isolate these, mask that, invert that mask, bring in the gizmo center to the unmasked areas, and we can push that in like so, right? And we can redynamesh the whole thing, well, that sort of thing. All right, so now in these areas or in these gaps, maybe we can bring in some insert meshes. Let's press M. I'm going to click on just a simple sphere. I don't know if this makes sense to have it there. Maybe, yeah, maybe something like that instead works a bit better. Again, it's just to show you the kind of like the tools that I've been showing you in action. And just to make things interesting, let's use the damp standard brush to create a quick panel in here. Right, and then use the adjust last to push that in quite a bit. And if you want to have control over this gap as well, again, what you can do is go back in time before you do that, before you add that panel. So it's just literally two undos. Hold control to set that point, go forward, and you can also do group change points as well. Right? So the group change points works in the same way as the mask change points, that you can set a point in the timeline and say, okay, I want all of these things to be grouped in the same way. So now we have this group as well, so we can isolate that. Maybe in this case makes a lot more sense if I actually isolate that and give another group, so that we can, split these two and control them separately if we wanted to, and use the, polish by groups, that sort of thing. But anyway, the point now is that we have this thing that we can play around with. Let's do Dynamesh now with the spheres and smooth everything out. And now we can get out of solo mode, and we can switch that to the stage, or the stage that we wanted to. All right, so now I'm going to turn off symmetry. I'm going to use the standard brush, and I'm going to show you another really cool trick. I'm going to select the armor plate thingy, and I'm just going to select or add a bit of a bump in here so that it sort of like fits in, right? And if I go to the other side, I can actually visualize this a bit better. Let's do that. And we already hit like the 2-hour mark, so I'm gonna just to make sure that everything is all good. I'm gonna wrap it up with a bunch of like little tricks that you can use. So in this case, what I'll do is I'm gonna mask an area like so. Right? Just make sure. Yep. And I did have symmetry, but if I didn't have symmetry, I can just mirror that mask as well, and I can invert that. Bring in the gizmo to that area. This is like the usual stuff, nothing too fancy here. Just so that we can bring that in. And we have that. And now I can just take this. If I wanted to, I can duplicate that and mirror it, and still have the ability to change that in the home stage. But I usually all right, so another frozen screen there. I usually just work on one side and then I mirror and weld everything at the end. But having the ability to have all these pieces in the home stage and the target stage, it just speeds things up quite a bit. All right, so this one that I'm going to show you in the next tip is pretty cool, using the repeat last and the adjust, and it is just fantastic. So I'm going to go ahead and take something like the damn standard brush. Yeah, this is pretty cool. If you want something sharper, you can use the chisel brushes as well, but this one gives you the ability to design things a little bit better, I think. So I'm gonna start from here and go like that and like that, right? So just a simple cut using the damn standard brush in a mesh that has relatively high resolution, right? Now, before you do this, I would advise to lock the camera, which is that icon that I have in there. And the reason I say locking the camera is because remember what I said at the beginning, that if you move the camera, ZBrush count that as a stroke, and we want to use the repeat last. Now, the repeat last is this one right here that I mentioned before, right? So if I click on repeat last, ZBrush is going to take the same stroke and embed that even more. Or you can use the adjust last to, have more control. Now that's not the trick. The trick is that the stroke, the repeat or the replay last can use any brush, because it's only looking at the stroke itself, not the brush. So before I do that, I'm gonna hold control and remove that. Actually, sorry, I just noticed that might be one of the issues. All right, so I'm gonna undo this and do it one more time. Let's do it again. Let's keep it simple. All right. So what I was saying is that replay last will take a look at the stroke, not the brush. So we can essentially switch between brushes and retain the brush. So what I'll do is first I'm gonna do this, or I did that damn standard brush. Now I'm gonna switch to pinch, and I'm gonna play the last one. So ZBrush is gonna go through the same stroke, and it's gonna pinch that very nicely to sort of like clean up this panel. Not only that, we can then use the adjust last to see how sharp we want that panel to be, which is probably one of my favorite little tricks that with the new tools, right? The ability to go through this and generate this type of paneling really quickly. You can do the same thing again, just to repeat the idea of the adjust last, to repeat that process. I'm going to use the standard brush and maybe go through this area. Maybe smaller brush size. just something like that, something different, right? So we can do the same thing. We can go to repeat last and just enhance that a bit more. Maybe we can go to maybe let's do it a couple more times or one more time just to make it really, really, really strong. Then I can switch to the edge polish, right? And I can click on repeat last. That's not going to be very obvious. Let's try trim dynamic. That's a bit more obvious. Or, you know, let's go with the inflate brush, actually. I'm not entirely sure what the effect I'm going for in this case, but you know what? Let's do that, and then let's do the damp standard brush as well. Repeat last, and now we have like an insertion in there that we can adjust specifically to that point. So we can adjust just that cut in that panel, right? Not only that, we can go back in time to let's say this point, hold control to set a point, a target point in here, go forward, right? And now I can click on masking stuff and click on mask change points. And now we have these mask points as well. Let's remove this now. And I can, you know, add something else in here. Maybe use the clay brush to bring those areas of the panel closer. Maybe just in this area if I wanna, I don't know. This becomes more like a designing thing more than anything else, but I'm gonna clear that mask. And then just trim dynamic to polish all of these. I'm gonna click on control here to remove that point. There we go. So yeah, this type of paneling effect is super cool and really easy to do with the repeat last and the adjust last. Okay, so I'm gonna use the damp standard brush again, and again I'm gonna hold the control key. So this is something else you can do. If you okay, I'm gonna do it without it, but if you already know that you're gonna need an undo point in the history, you can hold control in the point that you are right now and just set a control, a reference point in there, and then do everything that you need to do, and then just use the history to do grouping or masking or anything like that. So I'm gonna take this and do maybe a line like this, and then another one in here, and I'm gonna go ahead and interpolate that just to use that tool and creates that nice indentation. Now, if I do the repeat last right now, ZBrush is gonna count every stroke that I interpolated except the first one and the last one. So if I do this, I'm only affecting the interpolation as the last stroke, not the first and the second one. So I can invert that like so, but you know, I think I'm just gonna push this a little bit, and then let's go ahead and refine this kind of connection in there. All right, so that's pretty cool. Let's see what else we can do with this technique. Something that I found like very very interesting for this type of more organic hard surface is, for example, to go ahead and let's go ahead and use the clay, the layer brush. Actually, I use that quite a bit for this type of things. So I'm gonna draw a couple of lines in here, right? Don't pay too much attention to the design of this, just to show you something else. Alrighty. So we have these points, you know, that look all right, but you can go ahead and polish them a lot more. Now, the trick that I'm going to show you has to do with framing this geometry and add, and add like tubes. But right now, this piece is like, you know, it's going to be pretty hard to sort of go through with a curve brush and try to match that. But thanks to the masking or group change points, this is now very easy. So all we have to do is go back in time, set a point in there, go forward. Again, setting a point is just holding Control and clicking on the timeline. So let's go ahead and group last change points. So now we have a nice set of polygroups in there that we can use for all sorts of different things, right? It's just polygrouping is essential in ZBrush, and now this feature allows you to generate, all the different groups that you want. Another thing you can do as well, actually, is I'm gonna hide this, and no, let's just keep it. Let's keep it. I was gonna show you something else, but it's gonna be the same thing anyway that I'm gonna show you now. So now that I have these polygroups, I can very easily isolate them, right? Let's wait until ZBrush saves. Let me see if there's any questions in the chat. All good. Awesome. Cool. So again, this is pretty, it's not very clean, but we can use the polish by groups, or in this case, polish by crisp edge. I think I'm gonna keep the polish by groups so that we can retain a little bit of that bumpiness. So I'm by doing this, by polishing like this, I'm actually removing that definition of the layer brush, but it doesn't matter. That's not the point right now. The point is just to create something a little bit cleaner as a guide for the next step, which, if I bring back everything, right, now we have these areas right here. I can't remember. I think I used this technique in the helmet to, yeah, I think I used it to add those lines in between the panels and that sort of thing. So you might use that this technique in this way. So now that I have this, I can go ahead and either isolate this just so that I only apply this effect to these areas, and you can go to the stroke palette, and you can go to the modifier, to the curve functions, and you have this frame mesh, and you can choose between, what to do. So in the UCG, I believe we do that for the backpack and the sleeping mat of the character. So anyone that just joined the stream, I'm referring to the UCG course, which is currently open, by the way. So if you're interested in learning ZBrush, this course is for absolute beginners as well. And that's the reason I'm using a different UI and the methodology that I'm using for to explain the new features with a custom palette as well. So in that course, that backpack that you can see, and the straps maybe, and the wraps that are holding the sleeping mat that he's carrying in his bag, that's done with these tools in here. So what I'll do is I'm gonna leave just border on, and ZBrush is gonna frame all the borders in here, right? So you cannot see as clearly, but there is an actual there's an actual curve in here. So all I have to do now is select the brushes, and we can go to, let's go to curve multi-tube. And now you can see there are, if I hover over it, those are actual brushes, and I can determine the size of my tube with my brush size, something like this, and click on that, and now I generated those tubes. Let's click somewhere else and remove that mask, right? So this is a pretty cool way to generate these very intricate and interesting patterns, making use of the new tools as well as the existing or pre-existing workflows to generate this type of thing. So yeah, this one is quite fun. Something else that we can do, let's say, maybe let's go ahead and isolate. Let's hold Control and Shift and isolate these. Isolate these pieces. Yep, and I'm just gonna go ahead and split this, split hidden, so that we can control this separately. And we can go ahead and, maybe use the, I'm just thinking, what can we do with this to show you the new features? Actually, let's go back to this guy. Maybe isolate this one as well. Split hidden. All right. So in this one, what I'll do is I'm going to use the Interpolate feature to sort of add some additional paneling effect in here. But let's go ahead. And this is one of the reasons I want to use the Interpolate, because it has this shape. So it could be a it could work nicely, because we can create a line in here that is a bit curvy, and another one in here that has kind of like the opposite effect. And because ZBrush is going to look at this and say, okay, there is this shape and there is this shape, I'm going to interpolate these two linearly, so we should end up with something that in the center, because they're like similar but opposite, in the center there's a more of a straight line. So that's the theory. We can go ahead and try that out with let's go ahead and use the standard brush. Let's use the standard brush. So I'm gonna draw a line in here. Let's do a bit better. There, and another one in here. And let's go ahead and interpolate that. So yeah, in theory, that works quite well. So now we have in the middle that sort of line, and that that can work as a nice paneling. So what else we can do with this is we can go back before I did the two pieces or the two lines, and hold Control and go forward, and I can isolate these either by masking them or using the adjust last, or even the polygroups. So I can take regroup visible, oops, not that one, group change points, and that's going to give me polygroups to just those changes or those lines. But as you can see, they're kind of like bleeding into each other, and I don't want that. So one thing we can do instead is use the adjust last. The adjust last is going to take a look at that reference point that we set in the timeline and allow me to adjust everything or every single stroke at once. So I can do this, just really increase that gap, and because now the last stroke or the last process that I did was just the adjusting, not the stroke itself. If I regroup these group change points, now the polygroups should be slightly different. Oh, actually they're not, because I'm still having that point in there in time. So it's still looking at that point. And let me hold Control, and there we go. All right, so let's see if that works. It's slightly different, but now it's trying to look at the polygroups, but not necessarily what I'm looking for. But anyway, this is roughly the effect that I was going for anyway. So we have that paneling effect in there, and you can keep refining this. Of course, it will make more sense if this is kind of like a line, like so, right? But again, it's not as strong as the other ones. It doesn't matter. We can use the adjust last to push that in. Same thing in here. Let's do something like that and adjust last, right? So now we have that panel in there. So that, as you can see, is kind of like a it's all over the place, but it's using all the different tools and the different features to adjust this. Just something else in case you want to, if you want to do something like this, or follow along and do something like that, and then start polishing. What I would do in order to polish all these pieces is to split them all in parts, like I did with this. So let's take this guy here at the top, right? I can hold Control and Shift, and I'm going to isolate those, right? In this case, I just want to separate that piece. Okay, so this is I only want to separate this piece. So this is another trick, but this is not a new feature, but I think you can find it useful. All right, so a few things to keep in mind in this current process that I'm going to show you. We have a relatively high-res mesh with Dynamesh, right? Or not Dynamesh, or we had like plenty of subdivisions that we deleted the lower one. What I want to do is take just this piece, right? Separate that, but I want to retain the polygroups, okay? Now, if I can go ahead and basically do it manually, just try to hide everything and try to get in there, but sometimes you might find this not as easy. So that's totally fine. The other option is to go ahead and auto groups everything, and that just allows me to separate this a lot easier. Just go ahead and do that. The problem with this is that obviously auto grouping is going to look at every single piece separately and is going to create a full polygroup. So we're going to lose that nice polygroups that we have in here. So something that I found quite useful is to use the polypaint to recreate the kind of like the polygroups. So let me just show you that. Again, this is nothing to do with a new tool or anything, but I think it's quite handy. So we can go to polypaint, and I'm going to click on polypaint from polygroups, right? So this is what I would refer to as a working polygroup, or yeah, work in progress polygroup, rather than the final polygroup. That's why it doesn't really matter. We can turn off polyframe right now, and you'll see we just have the colors of that. That's part of what I had in, or what I have right now in the helmet, in the other helmet that has all of the colors, right? So I just use this tool. So now I can go ahead and let's turn off. Where are we? Let's turn off the polypaint, right? Turn on the polyframe, and let's use the auto groups. So now we have different pieces, but we also have polypaint, right? So we can now recover the polygroups based on the polypaint. So hopefully this is not too confusing. So what I'll do is I'm gonna hold Control and Shift and hide these pieces. Actually, let's also hide all of these extra pieces. Make sure that's the only one. And I'm gonna split hidden. By the way, for anyone that's not part of the UCG course and doesn't know about this interface, the split hidden is under the subtool palette right here. You can split hidden there. So now we have this piece separately. And what I want to do is recover those nice polygroups that I had so that we can do zero measure, right? So I can use the polypaint, right? Because the polypaint has nothing to do with the polygroups at this stage. And turn that off. So we have nice colors, and we can go to polygroup. Here we go, polygroup, and we can click on polygroup from polypaint. So I'm going to click on that. I can turn off the polypaint now and turn on polyframe, and you'll see we have polygroups based on the color that we had, which is great. So now I can hide this piece, right? So I can do all of that. This is a little bit wonky in here, but that's just from the original mesh anyway. I didn't really pay too much attention to the extraction in here, but you know, that doesn't really matter. You won't see that. So now we have these polygroups. We have pretty high resolution for this little piece. So this that I'm showing you is just how to move from that sort of sketchy things using all the tools and everything and start moving towards something a bit more polished and presentable, or not presentable, but something that, you know, if you want to send it to a render engine or something, it might be more useful. So yeah, let's go ahead, and I'm going to switch to a different material so you guys can see that a bit easier. So now we can use the zero measure, right? Let's keep groups. By the way, and again, someone not part of the UCG course, we deal, like, there's a whole set of lessons dedicated to understanding the zero measure and automate the retopology process a little bit more in the course. But basically, anything that is in here, or anything useful that I use in that workflow is in here in the UI. So for anyone not a part of the UCG, it's right in here. So what I'll do is I'm going to keep groups, and I'm going to make the smooth groups set to 1, just because there are certain areas like here that are not super clean. So this is a process that will be automated by ZBrush when I click on zero measure. And it's going to keep the groups. That's the whole point of why I went through the trouble of creating the polypaint and assign the polypaint, or creating polypaint from polygroups, and then recover the polygroups from that polypaint so that we have the nice groups here. I can go ahead and remesh now, and ZBrush is going to look at the difference between the different polygroups that we have. That's the reason why it's so important to have nice polygroups, which with the new tools as well makes it a lot easier, and it's going to generate a nice geometry. All right, so that is a retopologized version. I'm going to go ahead and leave the half on. Now I can remove the smooth groups, because now the difference between the polygroups is a lot cleaner, and I can keep remeshing this. One more time. The more you do, the faster this process will become. All right, I think that one looks good. Sometimes you get these like little errors, so I'm gonna undo that and I'm just going to clean this up manually. So I'm going to select this polyframe, and invert that, and I'm going to hide this one and group visible, just to assign that little extra triangle to this area. And let's just use the smooth groups. All right, so not bad. Let's see. Not bad. Again, if you want to have something a little bit sharper, not as rounded in here, is not my case. I'm kind of like going for that roundness anyway. But if you want to have something very, very sharp, what you can do as well is before you run this, so when you're like, let's say at this stage, you can take this and polygroup this. Maybe not that much. I'm going to do it with everything on so that you can see. Yeah, so that little bit, I can just polygroup that. And because now this is a new polygroup, if I click on ZBrush measure, ZBrush is going to take into account that new group to make it a little bit cleaner. But, you know, I think I like it. So now let's get out of this mode. And now this is a cleaner piece. Doesn't have any details or anything, but, you know, we can go ahead and do, you know, start overlapping these panels. Obviously, I'm playing around with like less geometry. So it works. All right, so just to wrap it up, let's go ahead and take this thing that we had in the stager thing, and I'm gonna duplicate that. You can duplicate it and you can still have the home stage and the target stage. So what I'll do with this is I'm going to turn off, actually, I don't know if this is gonna work, but I'm gonna turn off target stage right now so that this new duplicate has no reference to the target stage, but it's still in here. I haven't set it up, and I can go ahead and mirror that to the other side. And in theory, I can just click on target stage, so that's the new target stage of this piece, and I can still retain. Now, yeah. So just because I mirror the target stage is different, so that yeah, it wouldn't work. I was just trying to be a bit too clever for my own good. So anyway, I just mirrored them well. That's all I wanted to do. I just wanted to test if I can retain that. I'm sure there's another way to do it. All right. So now that I have that, the other thing I was going to show you with this piece. Oh yeah. So I can, you know, I can duplicate that one more time. I want to turn this off because I don't need any of these target stages. In fact, let's go back to this one, and I'm gonna turn that off as well. And I'm gonna take this gizmo, and I'm gonna center these. Oops. I think we're going to the last bit of the stream. Yeah, something is going on with this stream, but anyway, it's been good so far. So we're just gonna finalize today's stream with this last bit. So I'm gonna take this mesh, and I'm gonna replace, or not replace. I'm gonna place it around there. I'm gonna mirror it actually. So I'm just reusing. I'm reusing one of these meshes. And let's mirror and weld that. And that's about it, really. So again, obviously we didn't have to do much, or we didn't have enough time to do a lot of the polishing. But yeah, I think the stream is gonna crash anytime soon. But anyway, we finished today. So we can go ahead and continue doing the polishing. Hopefully, the tools that I get, what I show you in this stream helps you to not only just understand the new features, but how to apply them in and hopefully incorporate them in existing workflows that you already have. They're really, really fun and again, super useful. Just to quickly recap what they are, you can just go through this palette. I'm just gonna open them here so that if you want, you can take a screenshot of these just so that you have as a reference of what the new tools are and how if you want, you can just recreate this palette like I showed you at the beginning of the stream, and you can just place all of these things in your own palette, and that way it's kind of like a good way to understand and keep track of the new features. And yeah, that's one of the advice that I can give you, and that's ultimately what we do with the Ultimate ZBrush Guide course, right? It's just to focus on the process and understanding the core principles of it. So anything new that ZBrush adds, which is awesome, like these new features, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have to recreate a whole course, because the fundamentals are there. And the way that I have sort of structured that course, you kind of like get an understanding of the how ZBrush works. So anything new is just like, oh, this works similar to this. I understand that this new feature is a replacement of this or an enhancement of this other feature and that sort of thing. So yeah, hopefully that works and that helps. So just to wrap up this live stream, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those. Otherwise, we'll wrap it up in here at this point. And again, for anyone new, just so that you know, the Ultimate ZBrush Guide course is currently open for enrollment. You can just go ahead and enroll today. It is a self-paced course, and the idea is to take you from the absolute beginner. In fact, if I go to the programming here, the fundamentals of it is like, from the very beginning of ZBrush, like what exactly is a pixel, why ZBrush works the way it works, all the way to detailing and rendering. So there's some bonus modules where I talked about poly painting, fiber mesh, rendering, and plus the bonus module, which are just live workshops that essentially cover things like booleans, deformers, dynamics, things that are a little bit more advanced sometimes. And again, things like this live workshop, which is something that I'm trying to do with every new update, to do like a live workshop. But again, to explain the new features. But again, the core principle, the program covers all the basics. So you should be able to figure things out on your own. So yeah, if you're interested, this is the UCG course. It is currently open for enrollment. You can go ahead and grab a spot in there. And yeah, I will make this again. This is going to be available in my channel if you want to rewatch it. For those of you from the UCG course that are in here, I can see some of you guys are in here. I will also share the UI that I currently have, especially with this palette. If you want to follow along with this specific palette as well, that will be in your resources section of the course. Awesome. Great. So I'm glad that you found it useful. Glad you like it, guys. I'm gonna leave it here then, and I will see you next time. Cheers.